Good evening, good nobbins, good morning, good morning. I'm not exactly sure where you're probably watching this right now or what time you're watching this, but I'd like to welcome you to Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. Well, not exactly Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, more like an undergraduate student who's not even an English major does Charles Dickens. You get the rest of it. Yeah, I want to welcome all of you to our little screening. I first want to thank Mr. Lee Manchester here at Wagner College for giving me the opportunity to do this. And I'm absolutely thrilled to get to share with you and your families one of my absolute favorite stories of all time. All you need to know about me before we hop into this is that I'm a big Dickens file, and not only am I a Dickens file, I'm a big fan of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. That is right. I have seen every single version, every film version, every filmed performance version. I have every adaptation, every sequel. You imagine it at my fingertips. It is my favorite story ever told. We have everything from my absolute favorite version, which is the 1984 George C. Scott version, which originally aired on CBS, but then made its way into a wide release in theaters when it went overseas. We have everything from the Robert Zemeckis version, the 2009 Jim Carrey version, which was awful in CGI, and they focused so much on the darker aspects of the story and completely missed the heart. And then we have all the fun, uplifting stuff, like Michael Caine in the Muppet version. We have, not Donald Duck, Daffy Duck in Bah Humduck. Some incredible adaptations out there, and if you can't tell by my ramblings, I'm an absolute nerd, and I really suggest that you turn this off unless you want to watch my ramblings for the next 75 minutes or so on Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. And that's exactly why I brought you all here tonight, is to talk about this book, to talk about Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. Now, I want you to go back, and I want you to imagine, so picture about 1843. And Charles Dickens, who is one of the most prolific writers of his time, has a couple great hits under his belt, had had a slew of failures. He had just published a book called Martin Chuzzlewit, which was an absolute failure when it came to distribution. No one was buying this book up. And so he was absolutely at ends with himself. He had a family to support, and he couldn't get published no matter how hard he tried. And what happened with Dickens is that Dickens, in the same tradition of everyone after him, from Mark Twain all the way up to today with Nalaja's son and Audre Lorde and all of those incredible freedom writers of our contemporary time, he was concerned with the state of England in the period of the Industrial Revolution. Because you have to look at it this way. You had people out in the countryside who, for the first time, we were now moving from land being where wealth was, and land being the commodity that everyone had to have. And we were now moving into a capitalist industrial society in which people were flooding the cities. But something that is often overlooked when we have a discussion about the Industrial Revolution in London is that we often do not discuss the fact that you had all of these old-time practices, including having gigantic families and providing for gigantic families, that all of a sudden were impossible. And so you developed what was called the poor and the undeserving poor of London. And it was a city that was overridden with a small middle class and a very large population of poor and undeserving poor and a very wealthy elite. And they were all living on top of each other in this big cluster of what was London of the time. And Dickens in 1843 made a trip out to Manchester. And we went out to Manchester. He made his way down to the coal mines, where he saw children working in the mines. These were children who were developing black lung. These were children who didn't have access to a quality education. And that set a fire in his heart. And so his goal from that point became that he wanted to write a letter in defense of these children. But how was he going to do that? And what he did was what started as a little book of musings for him that eventually would be published as an editorial that would get put into the papers. But his idea was to write a simple Christmas carol, to write a song on behalf of those who did not have a voice for themselves. And that, my friends, was the advent of what would eventually become the published book that we know and love today, Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. And this is absolutely not Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. In fact, I couldn't get my hands on a nice printed copy of the book. So what I did instead was I went to the Wagner College library and I found the most generic hardcover book I could find. And I really don't think it gets more generic than this. I mean, this looks like something you would be in communist Russia, and you'd go up to the book depository and you would say, "I would like one book." And they would say, "Book," and they would give it to you. So that's about the end that I'm going to be playing with this. But I do invite you and your loved ones to please sit back, relax, and enjoy Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol.